Are we ready? Mr. Lee Miller, people.
Welcome to another presentation. I'm from House of David Fellowship, Richmond, Virginia. So we have a good time doing this kind of stuff, and I appreciate what he said. Actually, what I thought he was going to say is that we only beat up on each other for 8 days, and then the other 350 whatever, we behave, but that's not what he said. So I'm going to have to check in on his group. All right, here we go. I'm starting up. We're going to do things differently today, but not in the first session. I'll tell you more about it as we get to the end. All right, so let's get started. The title of today's, oh, by the way, here's my email address. The title of the presentation, you may have seen it in the booklet, is Archaeology, Mashiach, the Anointed, and Daniel. But the most important words on this slide is part 1. Yeah, because it is unrealistic to think that I can cover these 3 subjects thoroughly in the time I've been allotted. So we'll just take care of that right now, okay? But we have a solution after the last slide. And if we have some time today, I've got 25 slides after the last slide just to get you started. All right, so I always do on tap so you know it's coming. So one of the things we're going to do today is we're going to identify the problem. And the problem that I want to identify, there's many problems, I know, but the problem I want to identify is predictive prophecy. And when we get into that, this will make sense. So, but I'm just saying the problem I'm addressing today is predictive prophecy. Not that you have that problem, but there are other people that do have that problem. All right, I also feel that at times we need to let God make his case. Okay, I mean, we really do. Archaeology. The question I would say to you is, what can we learn? Everybody here has probably heard of archaeology. Second part of the title, the Anointed One, what he cannot control. There are things Yeshua could not control prior to being born. So we'll look at a couple things. Daniel, the tail of the tape, that's a figure of speech. Anybody familiar with boxing knows that before they get in the ring to start, everybody pulls out their tape measure. So that's what we're going to be doing with Daniel. Finally, I've got a couple of slides in here. I just want you to know that one of the problems in archaeology, and I was just sharing this with somebody else earlier today, is that somebody could be working out in the area, and they got their brush, and they're digging, and then they see this hand sticking up. Okay, so then they're going to call somebody, and so people are going to eventually get out there, and they're going to look, and they're going to talk, and they're going to call somebody else. And finally, after 3 months, they're going to decide, you know what, to dig this place. So then they'll go out and hire somebody, and they'll get 200 people there hired, and they'll come out there, and for 10 years, they'll dig that place. So they'll find some stuff. Then they'll take pictures, and then they'll do all the other things that they do. 10 years later, the first journal article that talks about what they discovered 20 years ago is published. So I want you to understand that archaeology is not Rome was built in a day. It was not built in a day, and you will never find anything and get the total result of it in a day. Having said that, archaeology is killing it. Somebody has a phone up here that's going off right now. I don't know who that is. Okay, so to solve some of the problems, there are ancient languages. I just had something come down to me. I'm going to say it was in September, could have been the last 2 weeks, and what it was is they were talking about the fact that a brand new language had been discovered that nobody's ever seen before in the history of the world. And I'm like, wow, this is cool. So there are some things that are going to be happening using artificial intelligence, and I'm going to let you know, right? So let's keep going. After the last slide, before we start, once again, it contains references, links, and additional slides, and if time allows, and we'll talk about that, we'll do the next 30 slides after the last slide, just so you can get a feel, okay? All right, here we go. This is what the last slide looks like, the weight of evidence. When I do a study, I take all of the scriptures, I take everything that's not in the scriptures, I take archaeological discoveries, whatever else I can find, and I put them all in a mixing bowl, stir them up, and stick them in the oven, and then I come in here and report on what it turned out. This is what I do. All right, so the problem. When people come to the text and start by saying, I don't believe in miracles or predictive prophecy, you instantly have a problem testifying to them of the Scriptures. Because they have already blocked off a certain aspect of the Scriptures that are very important to us. Now, we're not going to run into that problem, but there are people out there who are going to have a problem with that. They don't believe in miracles, and they don't believe in predictive prophecy. So that is what we're going to address. Now, in God needs to be given an opportunity to make his case, I believe that Deuteronomy 32:1 answers what I've been asking for, because there is a discussion about heaven and earth being two witnesses. Heaven's been testifying for a long time. You can see that by reading Romans 10, I think it's 14, could be 17, 18. That goes back over to Psalm 19, I think it's 4, could be 3. They understood the heavens. They understood what they meant. Traditions have been passed down. We don't do that. That's been gone for a long time. But back then, that was the standard. That was the evidence Paul presented. So the heavens are good. But now there's a new witness on the block, and that's the earth. And the earth, for the last over 150 years, generally speaking, has been testifying to the accuracy of the Scriptures. Now, to me, that's really a big deal, because when you have that type of accuracy, it makes those people who are unbelievers and are trying to tear me down, makes their job a whole lot harder. So I like that. Now, the pattern is scholars today, now this is really cool, scholars today are able to fix dates by the astronomical observations of ancient records. I'm going to read that again. One way scholars are able to fix dates, we're talking chronology, calendar stuff, is by the astronomical observations of ancient records. So, let me just tell you what's going on. Different nations, for the last several thousand years, have been keeping records about stuff that has gone on. Some of it was astronomical, so cosmology, but others was like this volcano just went off, and there was a flood over here, and it could have been some other type of thing. So there were events, and the other nations, including Israel, because I can quote you that stuff out of the prophets, they said, oh, by the way, this just happened. They are writing down these observations. And, I mean, they probably wrote them down for their people. I mean, we write stuff in the newspaper. This happened yesterday. This building collapsed. These many people are dead. We see that in the news. So we do write stuff down. These people wrote stuff down too. We're just now digging it up and finding out what it says. And then we're going, oh, okay, so I'm going to tell you where the magic comes in. The Babylonians documented astronomical observations in cuneiform texts called astronomical diaries. I'll show you one in a moment. With computer software, which I have, star groupings and planetary travels can be observed. So I can type in a date, and there is stars in this house going this direction, all the planets in my solar system. Just type it in, do it. You can do it too. Probably $49.95. Okay. Other phenomena on Earth, like earthquakes, visiting comets, that's a good one. Volcanic eruptions can be aligned using these ancient records and current software technology. And I'm going to give you one example, the Babylonians. Archaeologists have discovered tablets and fragments that date from 750 BC, 750 years before the first century, to possibly as late as 75 in the first century. In both 164 and 87, the Babylonians recorded the appearance of a comet in the solar system near Earth. They recorded it, wrote it down. Well, not wrote it down, etched it in. Researchers have been able to use the astronomical data about the path and timings of the sightings to confirm this was Halley's Comet, way before Halley was even born. Because the first time that the scientists found it, they said, oh, Halley found this. Okay, let's call it Halley's Comet. But in reality, it's been messing around with Earth for centuries, and we just found out about it. So that's cool. Okay, in summary, using an ancient record from another nation not named Israel, confirming an event's details using computer software, then locating this event in other nations' records, including Israel, allows for an absolute chronology. So what I'm saying is, if I got 5 nations that I have dug up, and those 5 all have a calendar with events, and I find this event, and I see how they're keeping time, these people mentioned the same event, the prophet Zechariah mentioned the same event, Babylon mentioned the same event, etc. And I'm looking at those pieces as they slide on the chronological scale. It allows me to figure out exactly what I'm talking about when I'm talking dates and times. And sometimes that's important. So I just want to let you know that this ability to do it has only recently been made to regular people like us. So it's kind of fun. All right, so I'm going to now go through some archaeological discoveries, and we'll talk about this and that. Okay, the first one is the astronomical diary that I just referenced previously, dated 164 BCE. The comet which previously had appeared in the east in the path of Anu, in the area of the Pleiades and Taurus to the west, and passed along in the path of Ea. And that's the tablet they figured it out from. This currently is in the British Museum. Epic of Gilgamesh. This is not a trick question. Anybody heard of that? Ooh, we've got budding archaeologists in here. Well, there has been, let me just say it up front, there's been pushback against the concept of there being a flood. You know, the one that Noah was in? Pushback. So, this particular accounting, it's called the Epic of Gilgamesh. And it is a different account of Genesis. And as you can see, I've concluded a little bit of information. Those links are live. When you get this as a PDF, they're all hot. Other accounts of the flood include Iran. These are different countries that have records of the flood in their past. These are the nations. This is not all the nations. This is just some of the nations. Iran, Egypt, Russia, China, India, Mexico, Peru, and Hawaii. Now, this next slide is not my slide. This was a slide that I acquired from someone. And what it does is on the top, it lists a whole bunch of nations and things of that nature. And then looking to the left side, all the things that are discussed within the Noah story and which one of the nations cover it. So right here in this chart, you can see who talks about destruction by water, or dealing with animals being saved, or was there a favored family, things of that nature. So it's all here, and so I just wanted to share it with you because you can look at that and get a better impression. All right. Artificial intelligence and archaeology, hundreds of thousands. When I say hundreds of thousands, I am not speaking evangelically. I mean hundreds of thousands of clay tablets inscribed with cuneiform script documents the political, social, economic, and scientific history of ancient Mesopotamia. But here's the problem. Most of these documents remain untranslated and inaccessible due to their sheer number and limited quantity of experts able to read them. But researchers are breaking ancient language barriers with artificial intelligence, including Israel. There's an article in the Atlas piece, okay? So data scientists are using artificial intelligence to translate these two very difficult languages, cuneiform and Akkadian, and they're using a neural machine translation system. So now, instead of having to take this away, track down a guy, get in line for 10 years, they can put the computer on it right in the field and have the translation in an hour. This is big. I just want to share that with you. All right. There's another tablet that's very popular, the Ebleite clay tablet, 2500 BC, so that gives you an idea when that is. Inscribed in cuneiform, that's the problem language. Over 1,500 tablets, 4,700 fragments. That's going to take a while, except it's not anymore. So that's exciting. That's exciting. The people were Semites, spoke a Semitic language that resembled ancient Hebrew. That's interesting. 2,500 BC. Place names like Sodom, Gomorrah, Zor, Admah, Zeboim, and Zoa. I thought I said that. I did say that. Yurgit, Gaza, Lebanon, Megiddo, Jerusalem are all in this language on these tablets. So those people who say, these places didn't exist back then, wrong again. Personal names including Abraham, Ishmael, Israel, Esau, and the Canaanites are in these tablets in 2500 BC. Abraham is still 600 years away. That's interesting. Gods worshipped include Dagon, Baal, and Ashtar. So they were out of the gate early. We'll talk about them later, especially Ashtar. We'll talk about her tomorrow. The tablets also contain the name Yah, another interesting piece. All right, a couple more things on these tablets. The critics who argue that Moses invented the stories in Genesis, believe it or not, there are people who say that, and that people in Old Testament times were too primitive to record documents with such precise detail are wrong, because these tablets predate the Old Testament by a lot of years. And second, the Ebla tablets predate the Old Testament. Tablets confirm names and locations in the Old Testament text. I just read some to you. Haran, the city of Abraham's father, are proven to be more than fictional, having been identified centuries before the Old Testament times. So this is just, you're seeing it unfold right now before your eyes. Those things which are disproving the critics. What are we going to disprove this month? And what are we going to disprove next month? Interesting. Okay, Rosetta Stone. Who's heard of that? Not the company, the stone. Okay? Interestingly, how many people have heard of the Rosetta Stone company? Okay? Now, this is for learning a foreign language. They will teach you a foreign language. So why did they choose the Rosetta Stone name? All right, and here is the this is the coolness part of this. If you can see the picture there, it doesn't look too bad from here. You see at the top, and then there's an insert. You see in the middle, there's an insert. You see at the bottom, there's an insert. Those are 3 different languages. All 3 of them show up on the Rosetta Stone. But one of them could not be translated because nobody knew about the language. So they were able to learn how to translate it from the other 2, and so now tens of thousands new tablets opened up that had the top one in there. Now we can translate it because the Rosetta Stone taught us how to do it. How cool is that? So I think that's why they took the name. Here's what the Rosetta Stone actually looks like size-wise. Not bad. Can't carry it home, but, looks pretty good. All right, here we go. Amarna letters provide valuable insight into the nature of diplomatic relations among the great nations and petty states of the 14th century BCE. Okay, so now we're getting past Abraham. We're getting into close to Moses' time. And so there are these letters, many letters, that have now been found and translated, in which it talks about what was going on in this nation and what was going on in this nation and what could you get to eat downtown here, and life was in these letters. And now we translate it and we're rebuilding the history. We understand it now. So cool. What was the religious significance of the period? Egyptians of the time, this is kind of interesting, Egyptians of the time viewed religion and science as one and the same. Previously, the presence of many gods explained the natural phenomena, but during the Amarna period, there was a rise in monotheism. So people were affected by what was going on. I like it. Okay, another one here. We have Merteptah stele. Yeah, I'm not good with this. Also known as Israel stele is an inscription by this pharaoh in ancient Egypt. You get that? An inscription by the pharaoh in Egypt from 1213 to 1203 BC. That's the time frame. This is well after the Exodus. The stele represents the earliest textual reference to Israel and the only reference from ancient Egypt. It's one of the 4 known inscriptions from the Iron Age that date to the time of and mention ancient Israel by name, and the others being the Mesha stele, the Tel Dan stele, and the Kirk monoliths. But this one is a very famous one. All right, the Moabite stone. This is the first mention of the God of Israel. You see Yod-Heh probably there. Omri was the king of Israel, and he oppressed Moab, and I took the vessels of Yahweh. Now, if you look below there, you'll see that I have put the link. So when you click on it, it's live. You can go check it out. Next, we have the Tel Arima Stela. This is 2 Kings 13:5. This is 805 BC. So what do we have? What's 805 BC? Well, we are past Solomon. That's past now. But we have not gotten to the dispersion. So Israel's still doing their thing. Judah's still doing their thing. So this is the time frame. And what is important about these is that these things are lining up with the history recorded on other nations' writings that align with exactly what the Scriptures say. Once again, this is some good stuff. Okay, Yahweh gave Israel a deliverer. They escaped Aram. Israel, these names are just mentions of it. Deliverer. Okay, so what I did was I tried to pull out some of the pieces there just so you could see what was going on. Sargon. In 1984, Apple Computer came out with the first issuance of the Macintosh. I bought it. And obviously, the first time you come up with a brand new computer, software is going to be limited. But when I was in college, I played chess, and they had a chess program. It was called Sargon 3. Well, at that time, I didn't know who Sargon was, but I bought it and improved my chess playing by using Sargon 3. And then later on, I found out about this guy. So this is one of the steles that you can see here. Represents the textual reference to Israel and Sargon, which Sargon's quoted in the Scriptures. So you can go read the things that he said. I besieged and conquered the town of Samaria. We know what that is, 722. Led away as prisoners 27,290 inhabitants of it, and settled therein people from countries which I myself had conquered. So now think about what has taken place in his statement. He conquered Samaria. He led away thousands and thousands of the citizens. Then from other nations he conquered, he dragged them to Samaria. So those people have nothing to do with Israel at all. They had no choice. They were prisoners. They had been captured. They were probably working for Sargon. And they got dragged over to Israel. So now you go to Israel. Oh, there's a lot of people here. Not a single one of them is Israelite. So that's what he's saying. He settled therein people from countries which I myself had conquered. All right. He also carried off the gods in whom they trusted, evidence of just how far Israel had strayed from the worship of Yahweh alone. That is a whole other indictment that we will not talk about today. Babylonian Chronicle. This is March 16th, 597 BC exactly. Once again, I was telling you in the beginning about absolute chronology. So there's a lot of ways that they do that, and they're really building the case. This is really taken off in the last 10 years. Nebuchadnezzar II encamped against the city of Judah, and on the second day of the month of Adar, he seized the city and captured the king. This is in 2 Kings 24, 10 through 13. And there's the link. Cyrus. How many people are familiar with Cyrus? He was very important in the Daniel story. So here's his cylinder. They found it. And on this cylinder is found the policy that the Persian government established for releasing people of nations that had been captured by other nations. Then Cyrus goes in, takes over those nations, and then sets all those people free, sending them back to the nations that they just came from. And the statement is, he ordered that exiled nations could return to their homes, rebuild their temples, and take their gods with them. And that is in 2 Chronicles 36:23. So nobody believed it. They said, no nation's going to do that. Then they found the cylinder. And I was like, oops, another mistake. Like my friend over there was telling me, his teacher said, always write your doctrines in pencil. Well, I'm going to make a recommendation to these scholars. Always write your absolute quotes in pencil. All right. You can see more of this in Ezra 1 and 6. All right, and then I have another pillar here. This was inscribed in the first year of this fellow's ruling and mirrors the decree of Darius in Ezra 6. And I have a book that I'm going to recommend. It'll be in the Atlas, which I have listed there, more on page 102. So what this book does is it goes through all of these finds, all the way back from Genesis, all the way up to New Testament times. Every page, next, new, next. It's very good. Now, I want to tell you, this is cool. I do have subscriptions to different magazines. Many of them are free. Many of them are not free. But if I pay for them, then I feel they have value. So one of the magazines that I take, and I don't know which one it was, but I was just reading through it. Sometimes what I like to do, I'll read through it real quick, pass it off to my wife. Then if she finds something really good, then I go back and read it a little closer. That saves me some time. She gets through the whole thing. She doesn't have to wait on me. Okay. So we found out something. 35,000 sites, current or have already revealed their testimony in Israel alone. That means 35,000 sites. They're either currently active right now or they have already given up their testimony. Now, I want you to understand how big Israel is. 8 of them will fit in Oklahoma. And there'll still be some room left over. So imagine if Oklahoma was being dug up. Talking 280,000 sites. And it's only getting more every day. So this is exciting. I'm sorry. I'm just excited. I've been waiting a while for Deuteronomy 32, verse 1, and the earth as the second witness. I've been waiting a while for that. Well, it is coming like a freight train. My wife used to have reactions. Now she doesn't. She just goes, oh. So every day I'll tell her the newest thing that just fell on my desk from this site or this dig or this scholarly journal that's reviewing it, and etc. And so now she's like, oh, okay. Because it's just too many. Just too many. So this is how we roll. Now, so this has been cool so far, but now let's build on that. Real Hebrew Bible figures. This gentleman, popular BAR. BAR is Biblical Archaeology Review. It's available for free online. You can also subscribe for some premium features. I think I do that. They had an article that said Archaeology confirms, this is a while back, a few years back, Archaeology confirms 50 real people in the Bible, describes 50 Hebrew Bible figures that have been identified archaeologically. There's the link there. So what they did is they would see where something was in the scriptures, then they would look through all the evidence they had. Must have been a database. I don't know. Okay. But anyway, they look through, and then they would match these things up. It'd be the same person's name. They're in the same office from the same country at the same time, talking about what was said in the scriptures. And it's like, okay, well, that's good enough. We'll put them as one. So now these people are coming alive through the testimony of other nations. I like it. Then he started up in the ante. Now it's up to 83, and he continues to build on that. So you'll get the link, and you'll be able to see that. And there's also doing the same thing with the apostolic writings, the Gospels. A lot of people mentioned, and so now they're being found in documents that are not part of Israel. So that's solid. Now I want to say as a summary, we can't prove the Bible by archaeology, but it repeatedly has disproven its critics, because while there are things that have not been uncovered yet, and I have a couple of examples later, so far there's been nothing that has disproved any aspect of the Scriptures. So that's encouraging to me. Let's keep it coming. Archaeology doesn't create our faith, but it confirms our faith. The more of this that you realize has happened, is going on, is continuing, the stronger it is. You want to sit down with me and you want to talk about some aspect of the history, this will be the smile, and I'll say, name the time and place. I'm ready. All right. Archaeology alone can't save an unbeliever, but it can strengthen our faith. I know the more the earth testifies, and God said it was going to happen, 32:1, the more it happens, the stronger I feel about it. All right, so let's transition to part 2 of this presentation. We're going to evaluate some verses now that seem to point to the pre-existence of the Anointed One. Once again, you got to remember, in my presentations, I have found some stuff. I'm going to share it with you, and then if you have a problem with it, you're going to let me know. So, it's like we have this unspoken agreement. Right? So here we go. John 1:30, this is he of whom I said, you know who that is. After me cometh a man which is preferred before me, for he was before me. Now, as I read that, it sounds like to me that John is saying that this person who's coming was before him. Okay, just a thought. All right, let's look at poured out as a libation. You people have studied the temple, you understand Leviticus stuff. Oh, and I'll explain that in a moment. Here is Proverbs 8:23. From the distant past, I was poured out as a libation from before the beginning, before the earth was made. All right, so, now let me explain the second bullet there. LXX is the Septuagint. That's the 5 books of Moses. It's called the Septuagint. LXX is Roman for 70. Septuagint is probably Latin for 70. Pre-MT. Okay, so prior to the 1st century, there were different versions of the Masoretic Hebrew text. And some of them are incorrect. And I got an example here that's coming up in a minute so you can see how we've sorted that out. So as time went on, there were adjustments made to the MT so that they would take out references to Yeshua. Some of this I've gone over. Right, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time doing that here, but I'll just mention things like Deuteronomy 32:43, the redemption of the land, the work of Yeshua, although the documents that the apostles were using, they quoted it in Hebrews 1:6. But there are other places, the resurrections in Isaiah 53:11, that was taken out. And there's a few other places of significance to me. And so this is another one where they made some adjustments. And I have something here, I'll show you about that as we get there. Let me also give you the other one, which is Psalm 2:6. As for me, I was poured out, anointed king by him on Zion, his holy mountain. So there's a couple there that are talking about that relationship before the earth's creation ever started up. These events were taking place. So that's pretty interesting. Now, this is a sidebar. This is really in the atlas, but I'm just decided to pick these out just so that you could see. Going back to the time of Ezra, and we're talking about probably 500 BC, plus or minus 100 years, I have labeled it as the A train and the B train. Now, in the A train, you have the LXX text. You can see the G there. And then the apostolic text, I put Q there. And then on the B train, you have the Masoretic text. Now, see, the Masoretic text is what everybody's Bible here has for the Old Testament. So every single thing that's been removed about Yeshua is the text that you're using to read in English. That's the situation we find ourselves in. All right, so then after we get past the resurrection of Yeshua, 3 more people rewrote the Greek because the Greek was not corrupted and had these pieces of information in them. And so they had to write new Greek to hand it off to the Jews so that they would not get confused by reading the Greek that came from the original Hebrew. So it's messy, but I just wanted you to be aware of that. I have all the details of that in the atlas. Continuing with the Anointed One, acquired by God. In Proverbs 8:22, Yahweh acquired, begot me at the beginning of his journey before his works of old. How far back is that? I mean, he's just closing the door. God is getting in the car. So he's just starting his journey, and Yahweh had acquired Yeshua. Interesting. Interesting. Brought forth in labors. Proverbs 8:24, there was still no deep when I was brought forth through labor pains, no springs rich, heavy in water. So if you think back to Genesis 1:2, before Genesis 1:2 was when he was brought forth, whenever that was. Source of delight for God. Proverbs 8:30. I was daily his delight, rejoicing always in his presence. Sounds like he was back there sometime. Anybody know who this is? May have seen that name once or twice. Psalms 110:1. Yahweh whispered to my Adon. It's not Adonai. If you look at the Hebrew, it's Adon. Sit at my right hand. This is the Almighty speaking to someone. Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. Okay. How about Daniel? We'll be talking about Daniel a little bit later, so let's look at this. 7:13. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. Now, this doesn't tell us exactly when this took place, but there's some other scriptures that you can connect. All right, next up, Zohar. Zohar is a Jewish, I'm going to call it a mystic writing. It could be apocalyptic, I'm not sure, but I quote it now and then. But anyway, here, in reference to Daniel 7:13, which I just read to you, it says, alluding to the Messiah, concerning whom it is written, and in the days of those kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom. So we have a discussion about the Messiah. Now, this was written after the resurrection. All right, so I only have a couple more here on this section. John 17:5, and now, O Father, glorify thou me with thine own self, with the glory which I had with thee before the world was. So that sounds like to me, at some time in the past, he had some glory, and the world wasn't yet. So, and then final verse on this section. This is part of his prayer. We just read 5, this is 3. That they might know thee, the only true Elohim. Because we know there's other Elohims. You can read that in Psalm 86 and a variety of other places. Probably some Job stuff, 1 and 2. Could probably get away with that in Genesis 6, 1 through 4. There's plenty of places to see some Elohim action. But in this case, Yeshua is saying that they might know thee, the only true Elohim, and then Yeshua, the Messiah, whom thou hast sent. So he's aligning that up, that at some point in the past, he was sent. These are some of the scriptures that suggest a pre-existence. You'll have to make that decision yourself. Okay, let's move to Daniel. Before we finish, I want you to know that we want to discuss the 70 weeks, but we're not going to discuss it from a normal perspective. So just be prepared. I want to see if I am really on the fringe, or maybe I see something. Okay? Before we get in that text, I want to discuss the perspectives of others concerning Daniel. And if you remember 2 days ago, the presentation in the afternoon had to do with deception. So I'm going to ask you for a moment to imagine that you don't know what you know, and you wanted to get a quick overview of Daniel. Well, one of the places I go to when I want a quick overview of something is Wiki. I'm an editor, Wikipedia, Book of Daniel. Here's what it looks like. All right, on the right, we have Daniel and the kitties, and then right below that, we have the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, this is how they are portraying it. First sentence of that writing, are you ready? The book of Daniel is a 2nd century BC. 2nd century biblical apocalypse. 2nd century, all right? Now, let me continue the first sentence with a 6th century BC setting. So, in other words, according to the person who composed this article on Wiki, Daniel was written in 150, 160, using documents from 550 BC. So, the book of Daniel is a 2nd century writing with 6th century documents. That's interesting. What does it mean? You have to answer that. Composition and development, continuing in the Wiki article, it is generally accepted. Generally accepted. What does that mean? Watch out. You're about ready to step into a ditch. When a scholar says it is generally accepted, stop in the name of, okay? Daniel originated as a collection of Aramaic court tales, later expanded by the Hebrew revelations. The court tales may have originally circulated independently, but the edited collection was probably composed in the 3rd or early 2nd century BC. So you see what's happening? The person who's doing this, and others like them, are trying to plant the seed in you that this book is a fraud. It purports to be a 6th century writing of apocalyptic nature where God declares what's going to happen with his people. But in fact, the whole thing is a fraudulent design that was composed several hundred years later in a completely different land using some documents they dug up in the dust. The seeds are being planted. Now, here's the problem for the critics. The prophecies of Daniel are accurate down to the career of Antiochus Epiphanes, king of Syria and oppressor of the Jews. That's approximately 150, 160s. They recognize, nobody denies the accuracy of the prophecies from the middle of that Persian time all the way down to 150. Nobody denies that because you can't. They're all nailed, right, perfectly aligned. I'm going to even discuss a couple of pieces. So the only way to get away from accepting Daniel as a biblical book that's accurate is to say, no, it wasn't written back then. This whole thing's a fraud. It was written several hundred years later. That's the only way you can get away with it. And a lot of people buy that. Of course, we know that's not true, but I'm just saying. Further evidence of the book's date is the fact that Daniel is excluded from the Hebrew Bible's canon of the prophets, which was closed around 200 BC. That sounds true. It sounds convincing. It is true, but it's not convincing. All right, so let's expose the fraud. You can search this for yourself. Just call up Google and type in Daniel 9 and the rabbinic curse. It's found in the Babylonian Talmud. Here's the quote: "Blessed be the bones of those who calculate the end. On anyone who attempts to understand the prophecy found in the book of Daniel, chapter 9, verses 24 through 26 of the Holy Scriptures." That's the curse. So they want to get people to not read Daniel. Because what's going to happen is if they read Daniel and they think, number 2, read Daniel, think he's a prophet, look at the 70 weeks, look at the time frame they're living in, realize the Messiah hasn't come, now we have a problem. So the Jewish leadership decided that we're just not going to allow that to happen. So we're not even going to classify the book as a prophet. It's going to be put into the writings. But there was a snafu, and I'm going to tell you about that. One could faithfully attend every Shabbat service for their entire life and would never hear this verse or any other verse from the book of Daniel, since no Haftorah passages reference this book. Well, why is that? I'll tell you why. Because if you are a leader, you have to control the flow of information to your people. You're already telling them that Yeshua's not the Messiah in the 1st century. But, you're up against some stuff. I mean, there's no way to get away from it. You're up against some stuff. In 85, they needed to get rid of the people who were believers in Yeshua in the synagogue. So they added the extra line of the Amidah. Okay, you already know this. 135, they needed to get rid of those who were still sticking around in the synagogue, but the only way to do that was to have a false Messiah, declare a righteous war, and then murder all the people because they were guilty of treason. They did that. So they were fully invested in destroying the believers in Yeshua. Obviously they didn't see for all of them, but I'm just saying that they definitely, the people took a hit. This is all history, all right? So, now what's going to happen now in the background that's going to cause a problem? 70 highly esteemed rabbinic scholars who translated the entire Tanakh into the Greek in 285 placed Daniel among the prophets. So we're talking about back when the Torah was translated to Greek. We know about that history. This is a couple of hundred years more, maybe a little more, before Yeshua. So they did this. We have it. We found it. It's in the Dead Sea Scrolls and a variety of other places. The 10th century, now this is 1300 years later, the 10th century AD editors of the Masoretic text moved Daniel to the writings, thus eliminating any part of the book as a candidate for a half-Torah reading. So they took it away from the people because the people are going to read, people are given this thing. This is the half-Torah readings. This is what we're going to discuss this Shabbat. You get the piece of paper. You don't think about nothing. You don't do anything except what that piece of paper says. So you realize over the years, you never read Daniel. Now, here's the funny part about that. If you go back to 925 in Daniel, the angel's explicit construction, and this may be the only time that a prophecy is instructed this way, it says, know therefore and understand. The rabbis say, do not know and do not understand. So this is making it tough on the Jewish people. Yeah, I know that they're coming around. That's because the Manasseh curse is coming to an end, which has been going on, 2,600 years? It ain't over yet. But people are coming out, and so that's good. So I wanted to I'm trying to give you some pieces of information about archaeology, pre-existence, and some stuff about Daniel you need to know about. This is part 1, an introduction. Okay, here's another part you probably heard. Do you realize how many times this biblical saying shows up in the world today? Belshazzar and his nobles blasphemously drink from sacred Jewish temple vessels. This is chapter 5, Daniel. Offering praise to inanimate gods until a hand mysteriously appears and writes upon the wall. What is it called? The writing on the wall. You hear it everywhere, even when it doesn't exist. I just heard an NFL broadcast within the last couple of weeks, and the broadcaster was talking about what's going to happen to this quarterback if he throws another interception, and he says, the writing's on the wall. I'm sitting there going, does he even know what he's talking about? So it's really interesting how biblical sayings become metaphors or memes. We should make a meme. All right, so the horrified king summons Daniel, who upbraids him for his lack of humility before God, and interprets the message. Belshazzar's kingdom will be given to the Medes and the Persians. Belshazzar rewards Daniel, raises him to be third in the kingdom, and that very night, Belshazzar is slain, and Darius the Mede takes the kingdom. Now, in this wiki, in notes 3, it says, Darius the Mede, no such person is known to history. Same for Belshazzar too. Guess what? That's wrong. And I'll tell you how this works. We had the same problem in 1946. We didn't have any old Hebrew documents. The one that was being used by everybody's Bible is 1000 AD. That's just 1,000 years ago. So in 1946, if you came to me and said, you don't have anything that really dates back, I would say, yep, you're right, I don't. And then the next year, this guy was dealing with some sheep, threw something into a cave, heard something break, went up there, and now we have thousands of Dead Sea Scroll documents that have changed the world. So in 1946, yeah, I was lacking. 1947, not so much. This is the tale of archaeology. I don't want to make a judgment about something which I have no evidence. I certainly don't want to say that you're a fraud because we haven't found anything on this, because in 10 years we're going to find that, and then you're the fraud. So this guy is writing as though he is God, and he knows what's going to be found in the rest of the time that we have on this planet. I have a feeling that's not going to work out well for him. All right? So, can we trust the book of Daniel? Well, if you're explaining it to a believer, I bet you could do a fine job. Pick some highlights and stuff, everything's good to go. But an unbeliever, they're not buying it, so how are you going to handle it? Especially young people in school. The Bible is a myth, it's a fiction. So, what are you going to do about that? Well, we'll talk about that on Saturday. Daniel's the key book in the debate about the authenticity of the Bible. It forecasts multiple world-shaking events, emergence of specific kings, the rise and fall of empires, all correctly. But the question is, when was it written? And so they have to push back. Why? Because if they come to the place where they say, okay, I'm done. Clearly, Daniel was written 5th century, 6th century, that time period. and that all these prophecies were done beforehand, they're true, that means that we got to look at the 70 weeks, because the 70 weeks tells you when the Messiah is going to be presented to his people. We'll do that math in part 2. And then that means that, well, God is God, and so God, being God, has instructions for me to follow, and so now I'm going to have to follow those instructions. I don't want anybody telling me what to do. This is going to be very hard for the unbelievers, because they're going to have to come to a place, once they realize that the Word of God is the Word of God, then they're going to have to make a change. That's it. It's either stay in unbelief, make the change. As far as I know, there's no other options. So we need to understand in our presentation of the good news and the et cetera, and the et cetera, that people are pushing back because they are scared to death that Daniel is true, and now they're going to have to obey what God said. Scared to death. We need to know this so that we can minister according to how God has taught us to do this. So once again, this is not hard. This is easy. We just have to become aware of the situation. If you know what they're going to do, what they're going to say, what their support's going to be, do your homework. Shut them down. What I'm doing here is I'm planting seeds of a little bit of archaeology, a little bit of pre-existence, a little bit of Daniel. Then, after I have this foundation, I can begin to build on that. So you can go, I didn't know that. That's good. Now you do. And then we can talk. You talked about this. I don't see it that way. Good. Tell me how you see it and how you got there. I may have to change. I could be wrong. We work as a team. That's how it goes. I remember back in the early days of my pastoral ministry, I would open. This is how I open. I only give one guarantee, people. I guarantee you that everything I'm telling you ain't correct. That's the only guarantee I got. Okay, let's get started.